Hello, welcome to the NHVR portal webinar, the first of 2020 and number 16 in the series. We're coming to you from the NHVR Brisbane office. Thanks for joining us. This webinar covers functionality for today's release, which is 7.0. That will be live at 4 p.m. this afternoon, 15th of January. I'm Steve Ryan, Product Analyst from the Digital Products Group, and I'm joined by John Barry, who's the Product Manager from the NHVR Digital Products Group.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, John. For those of you that have joined the webinars before, John will be a familiar face. I'm new. I'm here for the first time, picking up from Todd Wellard. Todd's been involved with the portal for a number of years and has now moved on to a new NHVR project, so I've got some big shoes to fill. Looking back over 2019, it was a big year. We introduced accreditation and vehicle standard service lines and continued with the enhancements of the access permit service. 2020 will see us further extend the portal services with the addition of the PBS functionality, which is the final major service line planned to be added to the portal. We'll go for a quick overview now of the agenda, and then we'll get the webinar kicked off. So basically, an introduction. We'll go through some of the highlighted features for this release, and then we'll have a short demonstration of some of those key features, and then we'll close out with some details about the next webinar. So I'll hand over to John now to kick off with an overview of the key features, and I'll just quickly run through the webinar format. So we basically have some slides, and we have a portal demonstration. There is some contact details there for support, so if you have any questions after you've viewed this webinar, you can come through with questions to us at the digital@nhvr.gov.au email address, and this webinar will also be uploaded to the NHVR Portal Help Centre as of Thursday.
Right. Thanks, Steve. So you mentioned a bit about the roadmap for PBS 2020. Normally we have roadmap displayed, and last year we talked about the refresh of that for 2020. So that's currently in progress, but as Steve said, PBS is the main focus. So that's shaping up to be our year, is PBS year, but we'll also continue to be doing some of the ongoing improvements to access, as well as accreditation and vehicle standards. You'll see some of that in release 7 today. So so we'll start with the new service lines that have been brought on as of last year, going very successfully at the moment. So we're seeing the application backlogs there reduced quite significantly. So there's a bit of automation now in the accreditation area, which is helping that. But there are still some improvements to be made. So we did have a vehicle calculation bug, which is really due to how maintain applications calculate the exempted vehicles, so that you don't get double charged if you add a vehicle within the same month that that maintain application was submitted. What was happening is the maintain application, it was using the current date to determine the exemption status, and with some of the in-flight applications where payments had been provided by cheque, or we hadn't processed the credit card yet, the vehicle calculation exemption was not working after it moved past a certain time frame. So what we've done is just fix it to the submission date, so that no matter when you submit, whatever is exempted at that time, it remains exempted for full time. AFM is one that we've seen a lot of growth in. We did originally start the accreditation project on the assumption this time last year that wasn't many in AFM. It was talking 10 to 12, a lot more now, but over the year and particularly in the last few months, we begin to see applications coming in for AFM. So we hadn't had a massive focus on AFM as part of the requirements analysis, but we're turning our attention to that now. So one of the first things we've done, which I'll give you a brief demo on, is that the audit details and AFM system attachments were mandatory. The audit details are mandatory for the other modules, but for AFM, it's a much more involved and sophisticated module, and so the accreditation team accept applications without having those details fully complete. So there were some workarounds put in place with pushing through applications with just some dummy attachments and some dummy auditor details, which isn't great. So we'll make the fix for that today, and then from today onwards be able to submit those AFM applications without having to do those workarounds. Vehicle standards area, so there's a lot of wording changes and help text that we've added. I guess with vehicle standards, our key learning is that it isn't as high volume as accreditation or access. And so if you're a manufacturer, you're coming in, you may be doing 1 or 2 applications a month. It can be easy to forget some of this stuff. So we're just really trying to focus on clarifying the language, make sure that if there is some questions we get that tells us that something might be unclear, we're adding help text, we're updating labels, we're doing those sort of things. So I'll show you a bit of that. Also made some improvements for the way that the IPS and exemption certificates are generated, particularly in the way that the conditions are structured, so that it's much clearer. For those that are used to and have seen the access permits documents, the conditions are very, very flat. It's just a list of conditions. They really tend to be quite short and sharp, mainly because Access, one of the reasons, Access never had the functionality to enable sort of proper indentation of detailed conditions with a lot of levels. So with vehicle standards, that's much more important. So we've introduced that feature, and so that'll help structure out those conditions in a lot clearer format. And then a small additional field there for the steering control and capturing that information, also cleaning up that whole section as well in terms of language. There's some global changes we've made. So we always do monthly security checks, and we have weekly reviews, and we have a daily dashboard that gives us a view of the security of the entire platform. No real highlights from the security checkpoint for last month. Things looking pretty good. We'll continue to monitor that, and we have a scheduled large-scale security check that we do every 6 months. That's coming up. So continuing focus. Access, a couple of more changes. So trailer registration details that were being put onto permit documents, where in reality those trailers can be swapped out as long as they're registered. From the release today, those permits that get issued won't have those trailer registration details explicitly on there. There'll be some text to basically say as long as the trailer's registered, whichever trailers match that configuration is fine. And then a small change for the low loaders. So now we've got 5-axle low loaders that can take up to 80 tonnes on the axle group. So we've had a limitation of 70, so we've increased that to 80. So let's have a look at those now. I'll take us into our testing system. I think we'll have a look at the vehicle standards stuff, Steve. So one of the, again, small changes, but axle group used to be there. We've changed that to just axle, because the way we've set these things up is that they are just referring to the axle. Yeah. In some cases, there may be a couple of axles within that particular section, but generally, and to keep the language consistent, axle is what we're really talking about. So a few more hints. So if you look at always the blue question marks will give you some guidance text. So if you hover over the steerable, you'll see some guidance text for what a passive steer is, and the second one gives you an idea of what an active steer is. So quite a bit of detail in there. Similarly for load sharing, we've got a bit more information there about what that means, yes, and when to tick it. Moving on to the vehicle details. Again, some more help text around the identification plate approval number. And then this new control, Steve, around the steering. So what have we done there?
Yeah, so in this one, John, the question down the bottom for turning ability, which is new from a recent release just prior to Christmas, and then based on feedback from both the vehicle standards team and from customers, we've done a little bit of tidying up to try and make that section a bit more intuitive. So we've taken steering up the top of the screen there. It used to have steering control. There was a repetition of that heading, so we've kind of removed that because this whole group of questions, all 3 of them, are to do with steering. Yeah. And so we've updated that, and then the way that it flows through to the end of the application form in terms of it being summarised has been tidied up as well. So like just making the language a little bit clearer and making it easier to follow for users, both from the customer's perspective and from the regulator.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Mass and dimensions. I see we've made that a bit more explicit.
Yeah, so in here previously there was the acronyms around GVM for gross vehicle mass, GCM for gross combination mass. So again, to make it clearer, we'll just spell those out in long form and added the acronyms in brackets there behind it just to for clarity.
Cool. Okay. Anything in the description? I think we just tidied that vehicle has been previously modified.
Yeah.
So that's a little change there. Yeah. This particular application, I don't have an engineering report, but we've changed the language there to call it manufacturers.
Yes, from engineering report to manufacturers.
Yeah. Cool. So, and then obviously those changes will flow through to the to the summary page as well. Right. So that's good. You can see it there. All right.
Yes.
So hopefully for those customers that are coming in once a month or even a longer time frames, that should hopefully try and get them started again.
Yeah, definitely.
A bit quicker. But of course, Upcare, the phone line's always available if you need some help. Just give us a call.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So I'll move on to, let's have a look at some of the condition changes we made for vehicle standards approval. So I'm going to have a look at a couple of live ones here. Let's jump into a particular application, really just focus straight on the conditions. Now, in the regulator side and for our road managers who may consult these type of applications, we have a conditions library. And this is what we're using to try and help standardise the way we apply conditions and also digitise it. So this has been quite a work in progress. We've got to flow down to some of the last vehicle conditions here. So this is an example, I guess, of structured conditions, so requirements for the vehicle there. This particular structure we've never had the capability of doing before, but with this change now, you can see that's quite well structured in terms of breaking it down as opposed to what otherwise would have been just one massive line.
Yeah, that's right. And everything was left aligned. So going through that with the vehicle standards team, they've said there's been work gone into this in the past for their manually generated certificates that they've had input from the technical writers to say to make it easy for the eye to follow with the correct indenting and sort of the numbering from a sort of a technical perspective, so that if ever needs to be referenced, it's much easier to find the section of the condition that people are referring to.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're still working on getting those automated certificates coming out of the system, but this is one of the probably one of the most important steps to achieving that.
Yes, that's right.
So hopefully we'll continue to do some more work on that, and then within the next month or two, we should start to see some of those automated permits coming out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So that's mainly the vehicle stuff of importance to highlight for this release. I'll move into the access side of it now. So with the low loader 5 axles that we're talking about, the actual group mass is what we've updated. So you can now go up to 80 on that group mass. If I go anything above that, you'll see that it's 1 to 80. That was 1 to 70. So that will now support, that new type of low loader 5 axle that can take that tonnage on the actual group. We've obviously had some workarounds in the back end, which wasn't too pretty for customers who are trying to apply for that, so that will fix that one up. And then in terms of the permit generation itself, so with this particular permit, we're looking at a prime mover, got a low loader 5 axle. There's a couple of registration details in there, and what was happening previously or currently up till now is that registration was appearing on the permit. So if I go and generate that guy now, we'll have a look at what this looks like. So what you'll see there now is that the semi-trailer is just listed with trailers must be registered as opposed to specifying exactly the applied for trailer. The prime mover still needs to be that prime mover, but the trailers can be swapped out. So those are the changes for access. Finally, for accreditation, we talked about the AFM application, so I'll just give you a view of that here. So in the audit details, this section was mandatory. Well, now you can see if we put some help text in there as well to say that the AFM audit is not mandatory to submit the application. Of course, as part of the process, it is, but in terms of the initial application, it isn't. We've done the same with some of the attachments. So the actual system case attachments are optional, as well as the fatigue management manual, as well as the audit report itself, and you'll see that there in the text. Optional for submission, not optional for the case. Yeah. So that's the accreditation. The final thing to work through is some of the changes we've made for reporting. So what I'll do is I'll jump in. I'll jump out of this particular application, and I'll just sign in so I can show you an operator's view in our test system. Get my password right. Okay, so jump in as an operator here. So what we've done for operators is, depending on what service lines you have enabled on your profile, you'll be able to see a dashboard that covers your case progress throughout all of those 3 service lines that we currently have in the system. So for this particular operator, fairly unusual. Most operators will have access permits, more than likely, and accreditation. There is probably less than a handful that would have vehicle standards as well. It's more to do with your engineers and manufacturers who wouldn't usually have accreditation or access in that respect. So, but there are some that do, and depending on what you've got enabled, you'll see an overall view of that. Now, these dashboards are quite interactive, so you can click onto a particular stage and see the cases and drill down into those cases. Obviously, more for those operators that have quite a few cases with the regulator at any one time. If you only got 1 or 2, then it's not as useful. But if you have got more than 1 or 2, then this will give you a view for those in progress cases about where they're at. So, you know, with this example here, I can see that I've got 6 that have been lodged. Nothing that I've lodged today, but 6 that have been lodged in the past. I've got 4 that are in assessment. If they turn up green, it means they're with me. So there's an action there that I'll need to follow up on to progress those cases. Similarly with the consent here, so I've got 62 cases that have gone out to road manager consent. You'll see here there's 2 that's with me. So those 2, again, will be road manager requests that I'll have to deal with to progress the case. So you can see, similarly for the accreditation, I've got 1 that's sitting with me, which gives me a bit of a snapshot of where my applications are at and what I need to do. Similarly with the workspace, so we've updated that so that now you have a combination of all of the service lines, all of the open cases you have for your account. You'll see that down the side here. And you'll also have all of the open notifications, and that's really about your notifications. Similar functionality we do also have for road managers. So if I was to have a look at a test view here of RMS, so that's New South Wales Transport now. This has given me a view of my access permit as well as my vehicle standards applications. And again, I have the same workspace view. For the regulator, we've got, again, very similar thing. So we've got the same style of management from a performance perspective as we do for access permits now being applied to accreditation of vehicle standards, which means that as a regulator, we can get down and see at a daily basis how quickly things are moving through the various assessment queues. And that will provide our managers tools and our supervisors tools to help ensure that we don't have any blockages and that that's flowing through as smoothly as possible. That's it for release 7.0.
Thanks, John. Thanks for that overview. That's some good key features that are getting released to sort of address some feedback that we've received both internally and externally. So that wraps up for today's portal. Quickly run through the details here. So we've got another webinar that's scheduled monthly, so there'll be one in February 2020. The date will be announced. There are some details on there where you can register if you want to be notified of when the next webinar is coming up. There's also help there on screen around the way you can get support if you're having some questions with the portal. So there's either help articles on the Help Centre, which you can get to 24/7, and you can also go and look at the previous webinars that get uploaded onto the internet. And also there's the phone numbers there and also the email addresses, so 1300 my NHVR, which you can call if you're a customer. And there's a number there for the road managers as well if they have any questions. And that's everything for today. So thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, John, for that great overview. And join us next time in February to see the release that will be coming up for 7.1
and PBS roadmap.
And the PBS roadmap. Yeah, that's it. Great. Thanks, John.
Thanks.